and welcome to the Learning Lab. My name is William Moores, and I'm the Executive Director of both the Canadian and Ontario Associations of Credit Counseling Services. And for the last 15 years, we have been benchmarking the financial fitness of Canadians with the help of Environics Research, as well as through the support of Sagen. And we couldn't be more thrilled to be here today to share that data and especially the very unique findings that we've found for two segments that we're going to focus on specifically here in this session, the alert and vulnerable of our population. So for those who were able to attend the first inaugural launch of this session at the 2022 AFCPE Symposium, stick around for the video. There's going to be more launched and more segments to be added on to this as well. But in addition to the video today, as soon as the video completes, David and I will be here live to answer any questions that you have. So be sure to stick around. Now, David, over to you.
Hi, I'm David MacDonald. I'm the Group Vice President of Financial Services Research at Environics Research. I've spent a generation studying the values and the mindsets of Canadians as it relates to money, financial well-being, and other important aspects that fulfill their lives. And I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about all of this great research.
The data now that we have over 15 years has really shown a remarkable alignment with the alert and vulnerable and all of the other areas of health. We've always assumed that was there, but now we have more tangible data that really speaks to them.
And what's really interesting about this research, it's been really quite validating to me to be able to work with you on this over the past 15 years. The Financial Fitness Index was born in the great financial crisis, coming out of 2008, 2009. We started creating single item measures in 2007 and created the index in 2011 and tracked it through a booming period. And now we are at the edge of what many people fear will be economic upheaval as interest rates are rising, the economy may be slowing. And so this is a time more than ever to really look at the well-being of Canadians, and if, in particular, of the people who may be struggling or at the most risk of struggling in managing their finances. And this is really what this index was designed to do, is to track us through time, but be able to look at important subgroups in specific moments of time.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting now being able to have the hindsight to look back at this data when we first started discussing how we were going to use it, to see how it has transcended over that period to really speak to the conditions of Canadians.
Yes.
And then the work that we do as credit counselors and financial coaches to see how that really correlates strongly with the behaviors, the attitudes, and just the opportunities we see with our clients. So I'm very thankful that we can go through this data and share what we found over this last decade.
Yes.
To really speak to and validate all the work that our counselors do.
Wonderful. Let's dive into it.
Let's get started.
We're here at the edge of it, what could be the most significant economic recession that we've seen in maybe a generation. And there's a whole generation, millennials, Gen Z, who've never been through an economic downturn, a serious one. Yes, of course, we had one in 2020 with COVID, but that was brief and fleeting. And governments intervened around the world with economic supports. In Canada, we had the CERB program and other employer programs, which really helped the people at the bottom who typically struggle the most during economic downturns. They actually saw their incomes rise and their well-being sustained during that period. Without those incentives, we would have been in a very deep recession. But it's happening now as inflation, global supply chains are causing a flood of cash coming after a small volume of goods. Everyone's trying to spend the cash surpluses that they have accumulated on the sidelines. And of course, we've got an inflationary environment, which central banks are trying to control with rising interest rates. All of this macroeconomic data is really not helpful if you're trying to understand the people who are behind the scenes working with credit counseling. And as we show on the next couple of slides, if we look at macro numbers like the number of consumer proposals or debt to income ratios or unemployment trends, all of these macro numbers show we're at or about where we were pre-pandemic. So is there a problem? What's the problem?
And it's so interesting as well to see and to hear you say, our generations now, or the generations that we've come from, we didn't have the same situations environmentally that are taking place today.
Exactly.
So how is that going to shape and change the demographics of the generations to come? And all of this is impacting and compounding together to create this perfect environment, well, really to have greater conversations and to learn new opportunities.
Yes. And you're probably seeing almost on a daily basis consumer confidence polls or surveys that report that large proportions of Canadians, Americans, people around the world are finding it very difficult to make ends meet. And some of these numbers, I mean, I don't disagree that that's what the people are reporting. But those are more emotions and sentiments that are moment in time. And so what we wanted to do with the creation of the Financial Fitness Index is create a multi-item index that wasn't as sensitive to that kind of sentiment, but really looks at what people are doing behaviorally as well as attitudinally. And this gives us more stability through time and allows us to isolate the people who really are struggling. It's a smaller group who've got very specific needs and challenges. And new in our most recent research are new lenses to look at them by. And I want to work with you and show that the people at the conference what we've uncovered in all this.
And also to create new education abilities of how we can have conversations with clients and working through situations that they're in, but also not just from a money point of view, from an overall health perspective.
Exactly. And what I'm looking forward to is, of course, as the next couple of years play out, if we do see continued rising in interest rates, inflation rate, unemployment may start to curve up. And if we do see very real increases in people facing difficulty, our instrument will capture that. And we'll be able to size it and identify who are the people at risk the most, what are their characteristics, their profiles, and what does the industry who needs to help them need to know about them to really connect with them and get them back on a healthy track as quickly and as efficiently as possible?
Of course, it presents as financial issues, but there's so many root issues that are manifesting and creating this situation for our clients. And it's especially interesting to see how at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw this drastic reduction in consumer proposal bankruptcies, especially with the SURE benefit. A lot of families were in a different situation at that time, but it wasn't manageable.
No.
Now, of course, there were other steps that could have been taken at that time, but we're all in the middle of the pandemic. But now to see that starting to climb again and the rise of these very serious situations for families starting to manifest in vulnerable crisis circumstances.
Yes.
That they have to make more dire choices.
In focus group research that I've been able to do before the pandemic with people facing consumer proposals or bankruptcy, they were normal everyday Canadians and making ends meet, trying to get by, and then life just happens. Maybe someone loses a job, has difficulty getting new employment, a health crisis, a divorce, a need to take care of aging parents. Mm-hmm. So events happen in life where you had been managing and then suddenly things go upside down. And what we want to do with this is help create an environment where the accredited financial professionals can work with people and make them feel comfortable being vulnerable, coming forward with their stories, and helping put together a plan to get them back on track.
And so I'm very thankful that you recognize, and of course the data has supported that so often it doesn't discriminate.
No.
So we can find ourselves in just a variety of things overnight outside of our control. There's so many of us that are in that situation in Canada that we really need to have more open conversations and have that safe space.
We've been focusing on people who work in the role of credit counselors, but we also hope that the lending community will use these insights to help understand and identify specific groups of borrowers before they get into difficulty. If they are able to notice patterns, maybe intervene or refer them to accredited financial professionals to help get them before they fall into dire straits. What's the worst situation is when someone loses a job and then turns to very expensive loans, payday loans, or other kinds of debt sources. They wind up digging a deeper hole, and they may believe they're going to be able to get through, but it's often very difficult to get out from under that.
Absolutely, and especially where all of these services and all of these industries, we're interconnected. Mm-hmm. We have to rely on each other to be able to be the full toolkit that can help clients in whatever they present. We need to rely on each other in our community, in our industry, and various other organizations to be able to provide all of the things that person needs. And so it's really great to have that conversation, and more conversations we can have to inspire that we can all lean on each other in the right way, as long as in an ethical, appropriate, and a safe space for that.
Yeah, it's really important for people to recognize they're people first. They're human beings with families, with needs, with emotions. And that's what we wanted to tap into in creating the overall Financial Fitness Index. and working to understand the values of psychographics and the mental postures and even the behavioral economic perspectives that these people are operating within, because that's where you can find the solutions to help get them on track.
We need to approach things in a very human first way.
Yeah.
And to recognize that everyone is working through with the best that they have.
You and I have both talked quite extensively. Neither of us grew up in affluent environments, and we saw people around us some who were doing well, some who were struggling. And that really informed me early in life about the importance of having sensitive measures that could really help identify who are the people who need help. Absolutely. and what is the source or the root of the need. And I'm really glad as I've explored a career in market research, I've been able to develop indices that help identify these people and track them very easily and very successfully through time.
There's never the correlation between using money and helping yourself through the use of money and how all of those things work together.
What led you and the association to realize that there's a need for measurement?
Through the creation of the Financial Fitness Index, but as well as the question and the 5 options that we have, it created a conversation starter where individuals could not only think about their personal money management, but think of it in a way that was a little bit different than previously had been positioned, in a very stark, black and white. There was no emotion or humanity that was attached to it. Mm-hmm. And so we created the Financial Fitness as a pathway to foster an environment where there was no judgment. It was a little bit more, just what it is. It's just a human experience, similar to anyone's regular fitness or health journey. And it's just manifested and grown into what we have today.
That's really great. So you reached out to me. And as a market researcher, I was always interested in financial topics. At Environics, we have a program called Social Values Research or Psychographic Research, which includes a number of financial measurements in it. And I always knew there was a relationship between money management and people's frame of mind. And I had, before meeting you, run various crosstabs that found that people with successful financial outcomes were not always the most educated or the highest income. Mm-hmm. And the highest income and most educated didn't actually always have the greatest financial wherewithal.
Exactly.
So when you came to me and said, we want to build an index that's different from a consumer confidence index that taps into the mindsets of people's relationship with financial management, you threw me a great challenge, and we worked together. Some of the items we pulled from our social values database and built that into the index, but then we had to go and create new ones. I want to just page through and show the audience what we used and a few examples of what went into it.
Yes, please.
The key was we wanted to make sure we were avoiding outcome measures like income or assets or debts, because we know that's just a scale. That's just a ratio, how big a pile you can build or how deep a hole you can dig. What we wanted is who are the people who are empowered and who are the people who are not empowered? And is there a financial fitness ladder that we can build that can help identify where you are and what you might do to go up the rungs to get into the most successful outcomes possible for you? So we created the Financial Fitness Index is based on 8 items, and we'll show you a few of the key tracking items in a moment. But when we created it in 2011 as a full item index, we've set the baseline at 100, and we looked at the 5 different segments and profiled them. And of course, the next year, we were very excited to go back and remeasure, and the index fell. And that was, we saw that there was people who were having a little bit more difficult time in 2012. But over the course of the decade, and we see this with economic data, it was a strong decade. The financial markets were recovering. The index started increasing year over year, peaking just before the pandemic in February or March of 2020. We had the highest score ever. And we were about to present it at the Sage and Home Ownership Conference. And then the pandemic hits. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, we all pivoted, did a quick remeasure in May of that year, the weekend before the conference, had dropped significantly down to 98.5. And that's with CERB intervention. And without those interventions, we know it would have gone much steeper down.
Absolutely, without question.
And through the pandemic, we saw a very sharp recovery to the point where in 2021, we're at 102.8. And now last year at 102.2. The big question, of course, will be, where will we be in 2023? And with the clouds on the horizon, people worried about their economic situation, their ability to afford, pay their bills, these are measures that we have in our index. we know that it's going to be a little bit more challenging in 2023 when we get our next measurement. And that's why we thought that this would be really timely data for the conference this year, because this is the time to learn about these segments, prepare for them before an increase of people looking for support come onto our doorsteps.
And it's always interesting as well that each year has been different, especially in the past four, that we never know what the next year is going to bring, but the data always speaks to that rising trend of either the actual crisis and vulnerability of Canadians or the lack of education that's truly out there and the need that presents itself for all of our financial practitioners and what they need to do to strike greater conversations and have more opportunity in their communities.
So I want to take the audience through a couple of our measures that we use. The first one is an overall self-assessment of financial well-being. It's a 5-item dimension, and you can read it on the screen. At the top, I'm in great financial shape. I have set clear goals that I'm on the way to achieving. So these are people who are in great financial shape. In the middle, we've got people who are neither in great shape nor poor shape. I try to save when I can, but I don't seem to be getting ahead. Very much the middle of the pack. Mm-hmm. And the people in the weakest financial shape. My financial fitness is very poor. I feel like I'm always falling behind, or that I don't know where to turn to for help. And this is one of the best questions that I've ever written in my career as a market researcher, because it really tapped into the mindsets. And every year when we do the financial fitness index, this is always the top loading, the top correlating measure that goes into the index. And people have asked me, can people really know and answer that question truthfully? And the answer is yes, they do, because they prove it, and people know in their heart whether they're on track or whether they're not.
Absolutely, and it's so interesting as well that when we started this journey together, we had a sense of what we wanted to achieve with the data, but in your provision of the social values work of Environics, it really changed the complete landscape of what we could do and how that really fused together. So could you tell us a little bit more about the social values aspect of the work that you already had done and how this all bloomed together?
Yeah, our social values, that's a long-running program at Environics dating back to 1983. I've been working with it since 1999 when I joined the company. And it's the hearts and minds, it's the mental postures that people see the world through. They're formed early in life, usually set by your teens. So if you were a fun, exuberant, outgoing person, that was set by your teens. If you were a little bit shy, cautious, introverted, you probably felt that way from that point in time. Values can shift at the individual level through life experiences, particularly post-secondary education and being open and receptive to new ideas. But values shift in a society as people with older values pass on. Younger people either are born into the society or immigrate from other cultures and bring those cultural references with them. But it's a very stable tracking system. And we have seen in our research that values can shift with economic upheaval. Right. So after the 2001 technology crisis and unemployment then, in the great financial crisis, and now we are seeing elements of people who, faced with financial challenges, impacts their personal psychographics.
It's so incredible to see how the social values have complemented the financial fitness index. And then it speaks to, as we continue to enhance our industry for financial counseling and all of our accredited practitioners, they continue to increase their tool belt with these skills that are not just regarding financial fitness any longer. It's regarding the complete entire picture of a individual, a family, and the community at large and what's best for them.
So what you see on this slide is the tracking history from 2011, then just before the pandemic in green, during the depth of the pandemic in May of 2020, and then in dark blue, we've got the results from last year. And you can see very clearly that the people who chose the bottom response, that they're really struggling, had been at 6% in 2011, had shifted down through, and even during the crisis of the pandemic, dropped down to 3%. And even the next segment up, it decreased. But after those supports came off, we started seeing that increase again. And I suspect we're going to be in that environment in 2023. People also know whether their finances have improved, stayed the same, or gotten worse in the past year. And we see these mirroring the pandemic cycle as well. So in 2011, 20% felt they were falling behind. That had shrunk down to 15% in early 2020, but the pandemic hits, and of course it spikes to 30%. Now it's pulled back. Other measures that we look at, are you able to pay all your bills and save a little bit versus just pay your bills, or do you find yourself turning to other people to borrow money just to get by? And we see this moving through time. And then lastly, more attitudinal measures. Do you have a sense of financial confidence? Do you have a financial plan that you're achieving? And then conversely, do you find yourself having difficulty making ends meet month to month? And we did see that start to rise through the difficult periods of the pandemic as well. So you see from these, we just showed 4 of the 8 measures here, but you can see that they're very personally reflective measures. It has nothing to do with your income, nothing to do with your education or your assets or your debt. It's all about your relationship with money management. That allows us then to look at 5 very distinct segments. At the people who are most in control of their money. They're in the looking good, the looking great segment. We've got looking good next. In the middle are those who are managing. Below them are those who are vulnerable. And then bottom segment are those in the alert segment. We wanted to really understand the alert segment because, of course, those are the ones who come with the greatest need, looking for help from accredited financial professionals. What's interesting to me in our tracking data is that if you look back in 2011, we had 14% in that alert segment. And through one of the strongest economic periods and market recoveries and stock market environments, that segment actually grew, didn't participate in those gains, and has stubbornly held in that 14, 15, 16% zone. You see much more interplay between those in the vulnerable, the managing, the looking good segments. People sort of flowed through those segments and enjoyed greater prosperity, but the people in the alert segment always were there at about 15%. And when we look at identifying the size of the problem or the challenge, this tool has been very effective in doing that.
Well, it's also very interesting how today we're going to be discussing more so the alert segments and what we've learned about that specific category. But there's such a variety of directions we can take with the data that we've collected because it speaks to a variety of circumstances for all various levels of our country and our community. But it's always spoken to every single year how within the managing, vulnerable, and alert segments, that all of those groups, all of them are in need of education and supports. And that's over 60% of Canadians that we found in this year alone. And traditionally, it's been hovering between 50 to 60%.
Yes.
And so although as situations can change, a life circumstance can just flip overnight, creating as someone who was once identifying as looking good or looking great, to fall into either of those categories, we always have the need for education overall and support and the ability for them to reach out in the community. But as well, there's such a large contingent of the managing, vulnerable, and alert of 60% of Canadians that are really in need of accredited financial counselors to be there to provide whatever it is that they need to get to the goals that they have.
I've long believed that one of the most important factors contributing to people's financial success is basic financial literacy. And the people who understand, and there are a number of measures that look at financial literacy as a tool, but the people who are exposed to it through their home environment or through schooling or on their own, they become very empowered. And what's the beauty of the Financial Fitness Index is you're not destined to stay in the alert segment if you fall there. You can learn about financial literacy. You can get help. You can increase up the rungs of the financial fitness ladders and get into more successful outcomes.
Absolutely. And it's really great as well that where we have the financial fitness score that individuals could take, counselors could walk them through that, and they could just benchmark and identify for themselves as well where they were and what their score was and how that trend had changed over the years. Today, we're going to be discussing more so what we've learned specifically about the profile, the alert, and those clients, and how we can work with them in a more tangible way to connect.
So you can see thumbnails of each of the 5 segments here, but let's take a closer look at the people who are in the alert segment. Let's begin with demographics. One thing that I will say, I'll share in research, we find that women, particularly young women, feel less confident about their finances than young men who are overconfident. But when you actually look at what they know, they're very similar. But women hold themselves back young men, exaggerate what they think they know. Both can be blind sides. As they age, they converge. But it's very interesting, and it's really important for financial literacy for women in particular, and for helping them feel confident about their finances. The demographic profile, number one, we see is about 2/3 women compared to half in the population. But what's really interesting, a decade ago, it was about even gender split. Now, other research that we've done has indicated, I've learned from, that women and young women in particular express less confidence in their financial knowledge and well-being than young men do. But their actual rated knowledge when we administer tests is very similar. So building a sense of financial literacy and financial confidence in women in particular is going to be extremely important for accredited financial practitioners to help empower them. Mm-hmm. As they age, men and women converge in their financial confidence. Maybe don't get exactly on top of one another, but women through life experiences, women's confidence grows. And as men mature, excess confidence abates, and they become more realistic in what they claim to know,
and possibly more honest as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, apart from gender differences, when we look at other demographic profiles of the alert segment, we see that they're more likely to be unemployed or at home full time. Some of them might be on disability or might not be able to work or have to care for family members that keeps them from working. And of course, when you can't work, that impacts your ability to earn an income, and you feel that.
And that speaks to the life circumstances as well, once again.
Exactly.
It can change in a heartbeat.
Exactly. In my own case, my father fell and broke his hip. He's 80 years old. And, if it weren't for my nephew stepping in, he would have had a lot of difficulty coping. Right. They also tend to be single. Now, what's interesting, they're not younger, but they're more likely to be single. And in fact, one of the interesting differences going back to 2011, in 2011, they were more likely to be younger. And we've seen aging over the past decade of the people who fall into the alert segment, which says that there are more middle-aged and even some elders who fall into that segment. And among those who own homes, we're seeing commercials all the time for things like reverse mortgages, tapping into equity or home equity lines of credit. And seniors are taking on more debt than we've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. And then finally, they're more likely to be renters, coming in at about half compared to 25% in the population as a whole. Renters often don't have control over their living environments. And in recent years, certainly in the larger CMAs in Canada, have been evicted to get, rent evictions is a term where you get rid of tenants so you can upgrade and charge more for rent. Absolutely. It's a big problem for people on lesser means.
And especially when that may be your only payment every month that you should be getting recognition for, and you don't have the ability to have that impact your credit score to be able to climb out of a situation that you are responsible for, but not getting the recognition.
Can you imagine how empowering that would be if renters could get their credit bureaus to recognize their rent payments?
Incredibly so. And to be able to create more of a general and actual true assessment of what a credit score should be to reflect their ability to repay.
And it's a quarter of Canadians.
Yeah.
With the single biggest monthly expense they've got, get no recognition for that.
With one of the largest socially shared goals and milestones in everyone's life is to be able.
It's a real misgiving in our financial system.
Absolutely.
Of course, looking at our financial fitness measures, it will be a little surprised that people in the alert segment are the most likely to say their financial fitness is poor or very poor, coming in at 3/4 versus about 15% of all Canadians. They're also more likely to say that their financial situation has gotten worse in the past year, that they've had to draw down savings to pay their bills, borrow from people. They're more likely to be concerned about making ends meet, 91% versus 35% in the whole population, 3 times the national average, just scraping by month to month. It's very precarious. And of course, given all this, given the demographics, given their financial fitness, they're the least financially confident about their futures. And only 7% are compared to 63%. They are on the sidelines, not participating in economic advancement and watching everyone else move ahead, and they're falling behind. It's going to be very damaging for them psychographically, emotionally, and in their relationships.
Exactly. The inability for them to be able to process why me? And why am I singularly not included in this group that's moving forward. And the sad aspect of that is that there's such a large contingent of those individuals who are looking at that perspective in the exact same way, but feeling completely isolated in that experience.
Yeah. In our social values system, we capture over 100 social values constructs that we track through time and look at different subgroups in moments of time. And I'm going to highlight a few examples of what the key values of those in the alert segments are. Now, the first one is fatalism. Now, in that precarious environment, these are people who question their own ability to control their circumstances. So they over-index on questions that measure fatalism. I'm unable to achieve what I set out to do. I don't have control over my circumstances. So if you're in a fatalistic mindset, it's very difficult not only to establish goals, but to keep on task to achieve them. Next up is a measure we call enemy and aimlessness, which is a pretty dark set of constructs that relates to whether you feel any sense of value and purpose in society. And unfortunately, when you're in the alert segment, you fall into that group that really question your contribution, your value. And so people really need a strong sense of hope. When we were in the depth of the pandemic, that whole term languishing about people who felt adrift, they weren't accomplishing anything, that was tapping into enemy and aimlessness, which we've been measuring for about 40 years in Canada. And it did spike during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Now, everyday life, they're also strong on aversion to complexity. They're overwhelmed with the pace of technology, the things moving around them. They're unable to keep up. Maybe they don't have the training and education to take on more advanced jobs. They see the world moving ahead away from them and feel like they're falling behind. Naturally, they also over-index on financial concern regarding the future. They don't have enough means, they don't make enough money to pay their bills and find it a struggle. When we look at a few other measures, given that, it's a little surprised they've got a need for escape just to get a momentary relief, to get away from the challenges that they're facing. They also indulge, not in large ticket purchases, but small indulgences, going to the dollar store, buying a treat for themselves or for their kids, just to have a moment of joy to escape their everyday realities. They're not chasing brands. They're not enticed by ostentatious consumption. These are not frivolous spenders. These are people who really are trying to get by in the margin. And the last one I really want to focus on is a construct called rejection of authority, questioning people who are in positions of leadership and authority and doubting their integrity, questioning their intent, feeling they're always against them. We're going to come back to this because we have a set of behavioral economics driven measures where there's another construct very similar to this that is going to be really important for accredited financial professionals to look at. People in the alert segment score low on vitality. They have very weak sense of energy and drive and that sort of enthusiasm to move forward. They also score low on effort for health. Nutrition, sleep, exercise, those fundamental things that we all know we should be doing to keep our mind, body, and spirit in good shape. These are things that people in the alert segment struggle with. And I'll never forget, about 5 years ago, we were presenting the values of people in the alert segment. And one of the audience members looked up and said, "It sounds like they've got mental health struggles." And it was such a profound observation. We went back and cross-tabulated by other data. Lo and behold, they absolutely do. Many of those in the alert segment struggle with mental health issues. So it's more than just a financial challenge. It's a health challenge. It's a mental health challenge. It's a societal challenge.
Absolutely. And it's infuriating for me to know that in Canada that we expect Canadians, and elsewhere I'm sure is the same, and anyone who's attending today from outside of Canada can chime in, that we always expect the clients and individuals to advocate most strongly for themselves when they're in a position where they're not able to. So we expect those that are the sickest to advocate the most strongly for themselves, and yet they're just trying to get through their day to get back to a place where they feel healthy again. And so when you mix into that just physical health, mental health, all of the precursors or the system environment where they're looking out and trying to say, what's wrong with me that I don't fit into what I'm seeing externally.
Yes.
Also coupled with the judgment on that. And then additionally, typically individuals who are in alert are doing the most with the least and working through these incredibly, horribly tight budgets and stretching dollars in ways that many others just wouldn't possibly have the skills to do.
In some of my other work, I do work with investment firms, financial advisors, high net worth investors. And of course, they've been successful. The one interview that stands out the most in my mind was a woman who had gone to university. She had a couple of degrees in biochemistry, had a very serious health condition, and I don't recall exactly what it was at this moment, but she couldn't work. She went on disability, but she very carefully managed her finances, was able to actually to pull together a small down payment, bought a condo on disability. She impressed me with what she did more than any of those multimillionaire high net worth investors did. So if social values tells us about the mindsets of people in the alert segment, the other new lens that we've got to look at this group through is what we call decision-making mindsets and motivations. And this is a program that Environics has created that's very much patterned on behavioral economic theories and norms. So a lot of the common metrics like fear of missing out or trusting first that you would hear about in behavioral economics, we've been able to measure in our research and apply to the alert segment. And so this is not about how they view the world, it's how they make decisions in the moment. And
how powerful is that?
It's really powerful. When you look at the mindsets and motivations of people in the alert segment, you see some very powerful trends. So at the top, they are strong on simplifying and overthinking. So they will look for a narrow set of choices. Overthinking, get caught in the hamster wheel of, am I making the right choice or not? And maybe have it difficult to make a decision. They are strong on defaulting to habit and tunneling. So they go right back to what didn't work the last time without really having the ability to expand their horizons and find, are there other choices or avenues I could be going down on my own? So they need help getting by onto the different paths.
And we see that so commonly with many of our client situations. And it's just the inability to just get out of that rut.
Exactly.
Through. So that's perfectly aligned.
And they're strong on fear of missing out and avoiding loss. And when you think about that, people who are in financially precarious situations only see the world through the lens of, I'm doing without. I'm not enjoying what others are seeing. And we saw that in their values. But in the moment, if there's an opportunity do I pay for my kid's school trip? Well, I don't want to be a failure to my child. So of course I'm going to pay for that fee, but that leaves me shortchanged.
Absolutely.
So fear of missing out or avoiding loss. If I am stepping forward asking for help, it means I've failed. Mm-hmm. And that's really tough for someone in the alert segment to confront. The people in the alert segment score high on relying on feelings and are low on hyper reasoning, which means they're more emotionally reactive to the situations they're in, as opposed to taking the challenges in front of them and rationally and logically working out the pattern to get through. So if you've got someone who's struggling financially and is more emotive, they may not have the ability to make the choices that would put them on the path themselves most logically. The last decision-making mindset motivation theme I wanted to touch on is a very low score on trusting first. And when I first ran the profile, this is the metric that jumped off the page at me the most, because these are the people, their behavioral economic motivations is that they will be distrusting the very people who are there to help them the most. Accredited financial practitioners need to first gain the trust of a very skeptical, very frightened, very fragile consumer in front of them to win them over before they can start introducing plans and programs to get them back on track. And I think this research also is useful for policymakers and lenders and others in society to look at, because there's often a pejorative perspective given to people in the alert segment. Well, if only they just did this, they're spending too much. They don't know how to budget. If only they'd stick to a plan. If only they would come in and get the help that's being offered to them. But their mindsets are holding them back. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is help build processes and empathy and solutions that make them feel welcome, draw them in, make them feel that they won't be judged, they won't be criticized, they won't be lectured to, right. That they'll be helped, they'll be given a hand up, not a push down.
Absolutely, and especially if an organization already has those ideas and biases about a group of people, that if you're not hearing those statements, you're gonna feel it anyway. So why would you want to step into and be vulnerable or speak about something that you yourself have fear and insecurity about with a group or an organization or a service that really, it doesn't have your best interest at heart
Exactly.
and is already judging you and classifying you before you even get through that door. We do have a couple of quotes from accredited practitioners of ours in their experience and how this data correlates to their experience with their clients. And let's take a look at some of those now.
A financial plan is not going to work if it isn't geared to who the client is as a person. Someone might have instructed them that they need to reduce this expense or they need to completely cut out another expense. And although this advice comes from a genuine desire to help, it can actually make the person feel like their priorities don't matter.
We have all of this data, and it's an incredible amount, but we have a very short time today. We want to be able to leave our accredited practitioners with what can you do with this alert segment. And now that we have a greater understanding of many things that we maybe have felt that were there or connecting now more readily, what recommendations would we have for them to employ today in working with their clients in a greater capacity?
Well, what this research shows, I'm sure the accredited financial practitioners know that the demographic stats, the bankruptcy and insolvency stats, I mean, those are just numbers. Be aware of the mindsets, the motivations, the values of the people who are presenting in front of you. And I know that the skilled practitioners already sense this every day, and their intuition is exactly right. Be aware about the mindsets they come in with. The next thing is to understand that when people are confronting a financial crisis, people will default to past strategies that didn't typically work out. And it's really important to help reorient them and show them alternate strategies that maybe weren't within their grasp or within their knowledge that would work out more successfully. It's really important for financial practitioners to develop a sense of empathy with them. You have to bring and meet them at their level. And that means being open, being willing to listen, not coming across as judgmental. You need to really make them feel safe, that you are there because you want to help them and that they can open up and share their feelings, which go beyond financial matters, to really bring them in and win their confidence. If you can do that, and do that in a patient manner, don't judge to premature conclusions. You want to work with them to have them feel like they've been heard, and then start to introduce ideas and test the waters for their acceptance to see if that might be something that they can work with. Very importantly, start with small steps. When you're trying to rehabilitate or remediate people's past procedures that didn't work out for them, they can't turn over completely overnight. Small little steps, the little achievable actions that they can start with, that they can see positive conclusions from, will eventually start to snowball into bigger steps. You were able to accomplish this. What can you do now next? And if you check in with them and just gently show them the plan, what they can do, and show them that they're achieving it, they'll feel more empowered. After gaining their trust and confidence, more complex and longer-term solutions can be introduced that they can work with, more sophisticated planning. And then ultimately, once they are really working with you, reframe their mindsets. Show them that they don't need to feel fatalistic. They don't need to feel a loss of sense of value. They've got great value. Their financial well-being and what they've come through is not an evaluation of who they are as people. Of course, you're a good person. What you need help with is reframing and just seeing that there are solutions and people willing to help in your grasp. And so when you find yourself in maybe future circumstances, you've got new patterns that you can turn to that keep you from falling down into more difficult constraints.
And I think that the more that we can rely on our ethics and the work that we do with clients to reframe ourselves daily with even just words of affirmation to know why are we here and why are we having these conversations, to make this space, to remove our biases, to not apply any judgment whatsoever, and respect each individual in their entirety and their right to risk. And being able to foster that environment that we can recalibrate some of their definitions around what success means for them, and maybe how they can turn that aimlessness or their need for instant gratification into something that is more aligned with their goals and their outcomes that they have for themselves. So it's that slow iterative process, but that's why we're here, and that's why we're committed to the work. So let's turn over now and we can ask some questions.